My name is Amelia Carson, 32 years old, and until last year, I owned Magnolia's, the beloved restaurant my grandmother left me. My brother Ethan and my parents demanded I give him half ownership. When I refused, they took matters into their own hands in the most devastating way possible. They burned down my restaurant, my heritage, my everything. But what the judge revealed during our court case shook our entire city to its core. Let me know where you are watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe to hear how my family betrayed me and the shocking truth that changed everything. Magnolia's was more than just a restaurant. It was the culmination of my grandmother Emma's dreams and hard work. She established it 50 years ago when she was just 25. A single mother with a passion for Southern cooking and a determination to create something lasting. The restaurant started as a small diner with just 6 tables, but under her careful guidance, it grew into one of the most respected establishments in our city. My relationship with Grandma Emma was special from the very beginning. While my parents were always busy with their careers, and my brother Ethan made time for me, I was her shadow, her little helper, her pride and joy. Every weekend and school holiday, I would stay at her house above the restaurant, and she'd wake me early to help prep for the day. By the time I was 10, I could make her famous buttermilk biscuits from memory. By 12, she trusted me to make the secret family barbecue sauce that customers drove hours to taste. Those mornings in the kitchen with Emma were my education in more ways than one. She taught me how to cook, yes, but also how to run a business, how to treat staff with respect, how to handle difficult customers with grace. She would say, "Amelia, honey, in this business, you're selling more than just food. You're selling memories, comfort, and a little piece of home." My relationship with my older brother Ethan, however, was a stark contrast to the warmth I shared with Emma, 3 years my senior. Ethan was always my parents' golden child. While I was in the kitchen with Grandma, Ethan was being shuttled to football practice, music lessons, and advanced academic programs. Nothing was too good for Ethan, nothing too expensive or exclusive. The preferential treatment was obvious from an early age. For my 10th birthday, I received a cookbook and a set of measuring spoons. For Ethan's 10th birthday, he got a new computer and a lavish party at an amusement park. When I needed new clothes for school, we shopped at discount stores. When Ethan needed anything, my parents spared no expense. This inequality shaped my childhood in profound ways. I learned to be self-sufficient, to work hard for what I wanted, to appreciate the value of things earned rather than given. Meanwhile, Ethan grew accustomed to handouts and special treatment. He expected the world to bend to his whims, just as our parents always had. As we grew older, the gap between us widened. I worked part-time jobs through high school saving for college, where I studied business management and culinary arts. Ethan, on the other hand, dropped out of 3 different universities, each time with a different excuse. My parents paid his rent, his car payments, his credit card bills. When he was between jobs, which was often, they supported him completely. By the time I graduated college, I had already secured a position as sous chef at a respected restaurant in the city. I worked my way up, learning everything I could, all while still helping Grandma Emma at Magnolia's whenever possible. She was getting older, and although she would never admit it, the long hours were taking a toll on her. Meanwhile, Ethan drifted from job to job, never lasting more than a few months anywhere. He had a talent for charm and could talk his way into positions he wasn't qualified for, but his work ethic never matched his confidence. He spent money faster than he earned it, and whenever he ran short, our parents were there to bail him out. Despite the distance growing between us, Magnolia's remained my sanctuary. Every recipe in that kitchen told a story. The peach cobbler was adapted from Emma's mother's recipe. The fried chicken was perfected during a particularly harsh winter when customers needed extra comfort. The collard greens were inspired by an elderly neighbor who taught Emma the secret to removing bitterness. I absorbed these stories, like the kitchen absorbed the aromas of decades of cooking. I felt connected to something larger than myself, a lineage of strong women who expressed love through food and hospitality. Emma recognized this connection. We never spoke of inheritance or the future of the restaurant explicitly, but there was an unspoken understanding between us. As Emma entered her 70s, I began spending even more time at Magnolia's. I would arrive before dawn to prep work my regular job during the day, then return to help with dinner service on Sundays. My one day off, Emma and I would experiment with new recipes, updating classics, or creating seasonal specials. My parents rarely visited the restaurant. They considered Emma's work beneath them, preferring to dine at trendy new establishments where they could impress colleagues and friends. When they did come, usually for obligatory holiday meals, they brought Ethan, who would complain about the simple decor and the lack of exotic ingredients on the menu. I could feel my relationship with my parents deteriorating, but I was too busy, too focused on my own path to address it. Emma was my real family. Now the person who understood and supported me. Little did I know that this division would soon explode into something far more destructive than I could have imagined. The call came on a Tuesday morning in March. I was at the farmer's market selecting fresh produce for the restaurant when my phone rang. It was Magnolia's head server, Tina, her voice breaking as she told me that Emma had collapsed in the kitchen. By the time I arrived at the hospital, she was gone. A massive heart attack, the doctor said, quick and relatively painless, but there was nothing painless about the gaping hole her absence left in my life. The funeral was a blur of faces, many of them regular customers, who had become part of the extended Magnolia's family over the years. I stood greeting them mechanically, accepting condolences while inside. I felt hollow. My parents organized the service, taking charge as they always did. They selected an expensive casket, arranged for elaborate flower displays, and hired a well-known minister, despite the fact that Emma had rarely attended church. It was a show of performance for their social circle, not a reflection of the practical, unpretentious woman we were burying. A week after the funeral, we gathered at the office of Emma's attorney, Mr. Jenkins, for the reading of the will. My parents sat stiffly on one side of the conference table. Ethan slouched beside them, fiddling with his phone. I sat alone on the other side, still feeling disconnected from reality. Mr. Jenkins adjusted his glasses and began reading in a formal, measured tone. There were a few minor bequests to distant relatives and longtime employees. Then came the part that changed everything to my beloved granddaughter, Amelia Carson. I leave my most precious possession, Magnolia's restaurant, including the building, all business assets, and the apartment above. She has been its heart and soul as much as I have these past years, and I know she will honor its legacy while making it her own. The silence that followed was deafening. Then my father exploded. "This is absurd," he shouted, his face reddening. "That restaurant should be divided among family, not given entirely to Amelia." My mother began to cry theatrical sobs that seemed more angry than sad. "And Ethan?" Ethan stood up, knocked over his chair, and swept a decorative vase off a nearby shelf, sending it shattering across the floor. "This is bullshit," he yelled. "I am family too." "What about me?" Mr. Jenkins remained calm, retrieving an envelope from his desk. "Emma anticipated your reaction," he said. She left this letter explaining her decision. The letter was written in Emma's distinctive handwriting, strong and clear despite her age. In it, she explained that she had watched me pour my heart and soul into Magnolia's for years, learning every aspect of the business, respecting its traditions while bringing fresh ideas. She had seen my dedication, my passion, my understanding that Magnolia's was more than just a business, but a community institution. In contrast, she wrote, Ethan had shown no interest in the restaurant beyond occasional demands for money. My parents had made it clear they considered the restaurant a quaint hobby, not a valuable legacy. Emma wanted Magnolia's to thrive, not to be sold off for quick profit or mismanaged into ruin. When Mr. Jenkins finished reading, my father snatched the letter from his hands, scanning it as if looking for loopholes. "Can this be contested?" he demanded. Mrs. Carson's mental competence was fully documented. Mr. Jenkins replied. She updated her will just 6 months ago with 2 independent doctors certifying her sound mind. The bequest is legally binding. What followed was the first salvo in what would become a prolonged family war. My mother turned to me, tears streaming down her face. "How could you do this to us, Amelia?" she cried. "How could you manipulate an old woman to cut out her own family?" "I did not," I protested, stunned by the accusation. "This was Grandma's decision." "You always were her favorite," Ethan spat. "Always the perfect granddaughter. Weren't you sucking up to get what you wanted? My father pointed a finger at me. You have a choice to make, Amelia. You can do the right thing and share this inheritance with your brother, or you can destroy this family. The attacks continued for days. Phone calls at all hours, text messages, alternating between guilt trips and threats. Relatives I hadn't seen in years suddenly appeared expressing their disappointment in my selfishness. My mother called daily sobbing about how I was breaking her heart, how she'd raised me better than this. My father was more direct. Either you sign over half that restaurant to your brother, or you're no longer our daughter. Ethan was the worst. You think you can run that place? He sneered during one particularly vicious phone call. You'll run it into the ground within a year. Might as well give me my share now before you destroy Grandma's legacy completely. Through it all, I held on to Emma's letter, reading it each night before bed, drawing strength from her confidence in me. She had made her choice deliberately, with full awareness of the family dynamics at play. To go against her wishes now would be a betrayal of everything she stood for. So, I stood firm. Magnolia's was mine, just as Emma intended. I would honor her legacy by preserving what made the restaurant special while guiding it into the future. And if that meant standing alone against my family, then so be it. Taking over Magnolia's full-time was both exhilarating and terrifying. I had worked alongside Emma for years, but there was a vast difference between being her helper and being solely responsible for every aspect of the business. Suddenly, I was the one making all the decisions from menu planning to staff schedules to financial management. The first few weeks were a steep learning curve. I discovered invoices I didn't understand, vendor relationships that needed maintenance and equipment that required immediate repair. I spent 18-hour days at the restaurant sleeping in the apartment upstairs, just as Emma had done, too exhausted to even make the trip to my own apartment across town. But gradually, I found my footing. I maintained Emma's classic dishes that regulars loved, while introducing seasonal specials that reflected my own culinary point of view. I upgraded the antiquated reservation system, refreshed the interior with a subtle makeover that honored the original charm, and launched a modest social media presence that brought in younger customers without alienating our loyal base. To my surprise and relief, business didn't just stay steady, it improved word spread about the granddaughter carrying on Emma's legacy while bringing new energy to the beloved institution. Weekend reservations became harder to secure. Local food critics wrote favorable reviews of our updated menu. Even the notoriously picky food blogger for the city paper declared Magnolia's was entering a new golden age under my stewardship. This success, however, only intensified my family's campaign against me. The harassment escalated from angry calls and texts to more direct interference. My parents took to calling the restaurant phone, tying up the line during busy service hours. Ethan created fake negative reviews online, which I had to spend hours disputing with the various platforms. Then came the physical intimidation. Ethan began showing up at the restaurant, often clearly intoxicated, demanding to speak with me during peak dinner hours. One Friday night, he stood in the middle of the dining room, shouting that I had stolen his birthright, that I was a manipulative bitch who had turned our grandmother against her own family. I am family too, he yelled as customers looked on in shock. This place should be mine too. I had to call the police to have him removed in humility. Dating scene that left our customers uncomfortable and our staff shaken after they took him away. I personally visited each table apologizing for the disruption and offering complimentary desserts. Most were understanding, but I could see the damage his outburst had caused. The next morning my father called. Your mother is devastated by what you've done, he said. Having your brother arrested, is there no low to which you won't stoop? He was drunk and disrupting my business, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. I had no choice. There's always a choice, Amelia, he said, his voice taking on a threatening edge. And you've made yours, now we're going to make ours. There will be consequences for this behavior. The ominous tone of his warning sent a chill through me. That afternoon, I called a security company to install cameras throughout the restaurant and hired a part-time security guard for weekend evenings. I also visited the courthouse to file for a restraining order against Ethan, bringing witness statements from staff and customers who had seen his outburst. My parents retaliated by calling distant relatives family friends. Even my former classmates spreading stories about how ID manipulated my grandmother and turned against my family. People ID known my entire life suddenly viewed me with suspicion. I received fewer Christmas cards, fewer invitations, fewer friendly greetings when I ran errands around town. The isolation would have been unbearable if not for my restaurant family. My staff rallied around me, indignant on my behalf. Many of them had worked with Emma for years and knew the truth about my relationship with her and my dedication to Magnolias. They became my support system, covering for me when I needed a rare day off, bringing me food when I worked through meals, listening when I needed to vent my frustration and hurt one server in particular. David became my closest confidant. He had started at Magnolia as a college student and stayed on after graduation, working his way up to head server. He had known Emma well and understood what the restaurant meant to both of us. "You're doing exactly what she would have wanted," he assured me one night after closing as we shared a glass of wine at the bar. "She talked about you all the time. You know how proud she was of you, how you were the future of this place." His words were a balm to my wounded spirit. In the face of my family's rejection, such validation was precious. David began staying late to help with paperwork, arriving early, to assist with prep, offering suggestions for improvements based on customer feedback. His support made the burden of running Magnolia, while fending off my family's attacks, somewhat lighter. As the months passed, I settled into a new normal. I accepted that my relationship with my parents and brother was likely damaged beyond repair. I changed my phone number, blocked their emails, and instructed my staff not to put through their calls to the restaurant. The restraining order kept Ethan at bay, at least physically. I threw myself into making Magnolias the best it could be, honoring Emma's memory. With every service, the restaurant became more than just my inheritance or my business. It was my sanctuary, the place where I felt closest to the woman who had believed in me when no one else did. On quiet mornings before opening, I would sit at the same corner table where Emma used to do the books, feeling her presence in the worn wooden chair. The scuffed tabletop, the morning light filtering through the stained glass windows shed installed 30 years before I was finding my way forward, one day at a time. I never imagined that the worst was yet to come. The call came at 2:17 in the morning. I remember checking the time on my bedside clock, squinting at the unknown number lighting up my phone screen. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, assuming it was my family finding yet another way to harass me. Something made me answer. "Miss Carson, this is Fire Chief Peterson. I'm sorry to tell you. There's been a fire at your property on Maple Street. You need to come right away." The drive to Magnolia's was a blur. I ran at least 2 red lights, my hands shaking on the steering wheel, a silent prayer repeating in my mind. "Please let it be minor. Please let it be contained. Please don't take this too." But as I turned onto Maple Street, I knew my prayers had gone unanswered. The night sky glowed orange and red, smoke billowing up in thick clouds. Fire trucks blocked the street, their lights painting everything in surreal flashes of red and blue. And there was Magnolia's, or what remained of it, engulfed in flames. I stumbled out of my car, moving toward the inferno, as if in a trance. The heat hit me like a physical blow, even from across the street, where a firefighter stopped my advance. "That's my restaurant," I gasped, watching as jets of water seemed to disappear uselessly into the blaze. "My grandmother's restaurant, everything!" "I'm sorry, ma'am," the firefighter said, his face grim behind his helmet. "We got here as fast as we could, but the fire was already fully involved. The building's a total loss." I don't remember falling to my knees on the pavement, but I must have, because the next thing I knew, someone was helping me to a nearby bench. I sat there for hours, watching as Magnolias burned to the ground, taking with it 50 years of history, Emma's legacy, and my future. By dawn, the fire was finally extinguished, but there was nothing left to save the beautiful old building with its distinctive architecture. The antique bar Emma had salvaged from a historic hotel demolition. The wall of photographs documenting decades of community celebrations, the kitchen where I'd learned to cook at my grandmother's side, all gone reduced to charred debris and ash. I sat numb as Fire Chief Peterson approached, his face somber in the early morning light. "Miss Carson," he said, sitting beside me on the bench. "I need to tell you that our preliminary investigation indicates this was no accident. Not an accident." I repeated the words, not fully registering. Through my shock, we found evidence of accelerants at multiple points of origin, he explained. This was deliberately set arson. The word hit me like a physical blow. Someone had done this intentionally, and in my heart, I already knew who. The chief continued, "We're reviewing security footage from neighboring businesses. Your own cameras were destroyed in the fire, but there might be something on the pharmacy cameras across the street." Later that day, his prediction proved correct. The pharmacy's security system had captured grainy but identifiable footage of two figures approaching Magnolia's at approximately 1:30 in the morning. Even in the poor quality video, I recognized Ethan's distinctive walk and my father's broad shoulders. The footage showed them circling the building, pausing at several points before hurrying away. 20 minutes later, the first flames were visible through the restaurant windows. The evidence was damning enough for the police to make arrests. I wasn't there when they took my father and brother into custody, but I imagined the scene: my father indignant and blustering Ethan, whining and trying to charm his way out of trouble, both of them secure in their belief that they were justified in destroying what they couldn't possess. My mother called that evening the first time we'd spoken in months. "Amelia," she sobbed into the phone, "how could you do this to us, to your own family?" "I did this," I replied, incredulous. "They burned down my restaurant. It wouldn't have happened if you'd just been reasonable, if you'd just shared like you should have," she insisted. "Now your father and brother are in jail, and it's all your fault. You have to drop the charges." The conversation devolved from there, with my mother alternating between begging and blaming. When she finally hung up, I felt hollowed out, as if everything that made me who I was had been scooped away, leaving just an empty shell. In the days that followed, I moved through the world like a ghost. I couldn't bring myself to visit the ruins of Magnolia's. I barely ate, barely slept. The loss was too enormous to process all at once. The building, yes, but also the final severance from my family, and the knowledge that they hated me enough to destroy something so precious. A week after the fire, when I was still barely functioning, David appeared at my apartment door with a folder in his hand. "ID been calling," he said gently. "We all have. We're worried about you." He coaxed me to the kitchen table, made tea I didn't drink, and opened the folder. Inside was a document that made no sense to me at first. An insurance policy for Magnolia's with a coverage amount far exceeding what I remembered purchasing. "I don't understand," I said, pushing the paper away. "I had basic coverage, not this." David nodded grimly. "I did some digging. This policy was taken out 3 months ago with significantly increased coverage for fire damage. The paperwork was submitted with your signature." I stared at him, the implications slowly penetrating my grief fog. "But I never signed anything like this." "Exactly," David said. "It's a forgery. And guess who's listed as the secondary beneficiary? Your brother." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. This wasn't just vindictive destruction, it was insurance fraud. My family had planned to burn down Magnolia's all along, collecting the insurance money after ID refused to share the inheritance. "I'm taking this to the police," David said, gathering the documents. "And then you and I are going to figure out next steps. Emma would not want you to give up Amelia, and I won't let you." His determination pierced through my despair. I looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since he'd arrived. His eyes were tired but resolute, his jaw set in a determined line. He had lost something. 2 Magnolias had been his workplace for years. A second home. "You don't have to do this," I said quietly. "This isn't your fight." He reached across the table and took my hand, his grip warm and steady. "Yes, it is," he replied. "Emma's restaurant meant something to all of us, and so do you." In that moment, I felt the first spark of something beyond grief and shock. It wasn't quite hope. Not yet, but it was a reminder that I wasn't alone, that there were still people in my corner. And maybe, just maybe, there was a path forward through this devastation. 2 weeks after the fire, I sat in the office of Jessica Harris, one of the city's most respected attorneys. The walls were lined with law books and framed diplomas, the furniture sleek and modern. I felt out of place in my jeans and sweater, still not fully present in my own body, after the trauma of losing Magnolia's. Jessica, a sharp-featured woman in her 40s with penetrating brown eyes, reviewed the documents. David had helped me compile the fraudulent insurance policy, the security footage from the pharmacy. The police report detailing my brother's and father's arrests, and a thick folder of threatening texts, emails, and voicemails I had received from my family over the months. "You have a very strong case for both criminal charges and a civil lawsuit," she said, looking up from the papers. "The arson charges will be handled by the district attorney, but I recommend we file a separate civil suit for the emotional distress business losses and punitive damages." I hesitated, twisting my hands in my lap. "They're still my family," I said quietly. "As horrible as what they've done is, I don't know if I can." Jessica leaned forward. "Amelia, what they've done isn't just horrible. It's criminal. They destroyed your livelihood, your inheritance. A historical landmark in this community. If they get away with it, they'll still try to collect the insurance money. Is that what your grandmother would have wanted?" The mention of Emma straightened my spine. "No," I said more firmly. "She would have wanted me to stand up for myself for her legacy." "Then that's what we'll do," Jessica replied, already making notes. "We'll need to gather more evidence. Were there any witnesses to the verbal threats? Any other documentation of their plan?" Over the next few days, Jessica's team worked tirelessly interviewing staff members. Ward witnessed Ethan's outbursts subpoenaing phone records that showed the pattern of harassment, and most damning of all, discovering emails between father and brother, explicitly discussing the plan to burn down Magnolias and collect the insurance money. The insurance company themselves became involved, launching their own fraud investigation. Once the forged policy came to light, they found that my father had used his position as a former banker to manipulate the paperwork, creating documents with a forged signature that appeared to increase the coverage on the restaurant the agent would process. The policy was an old golf buddy of my father's, willing to overlook the irregularities for a commission. As the case built, local news outlets picked up the story. "Family feud leads to arson of beloved restaurant," screamed one headline. "Granddaughter's inheritance up in flames," read. Another reporters called constantly camped outside my apartment, approached me in grocery stores asking for comments. The public reaction was mixed. Many expressed outrage on my behalf, especially longtime Magnolia's customers had known Emma and understood what the restaurant meant to the community. Others, however, questioned why I hadn't been willing to share the inheritance with my brother in the first place, suggesting that family property should be divided equally, regardless of a will's specifications. One morning, I opened my email to find dozens of messages from strangers, some supportive, others viciously critical. One particularly nasty email read, "You must be some kind of monster to turn against your own blood. No wonder they did what they did. You're getting what you deserve." I closed my laptop, hands shaking. This was exactly what ID feared: the public exposure, the judgment from people who knew nothing about my family dynamics, the way my personal pain was being transformed into entertainment for others. That afternoon, my mother showed up at my apartment unannounced. She looked terrible, her face gaunt, her clothes hanging loosely on her frame. I almost didn't let her in, but something in her desperate expression made me step aside. She sat stiffly on the edge of my couch, refusing the tea I offered out of ingrained politeness. For several minutes, she said nothing, just stared at her clasped hands. Then, without looking up, she spoke. "Drop the lawsuit, Amelia, please. Your father can't handle prison. It will kill him." I stared at her incredulously. "He burned down my restaurant. He committed fraud. He destroyed Grandma's legacy." It was a mistake, she insisted, finally meeting my eyes. He was angry. Ethan pushed him into it. "You know how your brother can be?" "Yes, I know exactly how Ethan can be," I replied. "Selfish, entitled, manipulative. And Dad has always enabled him. Now they're both facing the consequences of their actions." She began to cry quiet tears that tracked down her hollow cheeks. "What about me?" she asked. "What did I do to deserve losing my entire family?" The question pierced me. My mother had never been as overtly aggressive as my father and brother, but she'd stood by them, supported their campaign against me, chosen them over me at every turn. Still, seeing her so broken gave me pause. "You chose your side, Mom," I said more gently. "You could have stopped them. You could have stood up for what was right. You didn't." She left soon after, extracting no promises from me, just leaving a heavier weight on my already burdened heart. Was I doing the right thing? Was pursuing this case worth the complete destruction of my family? Would Emma have wanted this that night? Unable to sleep, I dug out the box of personal items ID salvaged from my apartment above Magnolia's. Most of my possessions had been lost in the fire, but I'd kept a few precious things at my apartment, including several of Emma's handwritten recipe cards and a letter she had given me on my 25th birthday. I unfolded the letter, careful with the creased paper. Emma's handwriting was as familiar to me as my own. The strong, confident strokes, a reflection of her character. My dearest Amelia, it began today. You are 25, the same age I was when I opened Magnolia's. I see in you the same determination, the same passion, the same integrity that helped me build something lasting. Never doubt your worth. Never allow others to diminish your light. Stand firm in your convictions, even when it is difficult, especially when it is difficult. The easiest path is rarely the right one. I traced my fingers over the words, feeling Emma's presence so strongly. It was as if she were sitting beside me. She had faced her own challenges, building Magnolia's as a single mother in an era when women entrepreneurs were rare. She had weathered economic downturns, changing food trends, personal setbacks. And through it all, she had remained true to herself and her vision. I knew then what I had to do. The lawsuit would proceed not out of vengeance, not out of spite, but because it was the right thing to do. Because allowing my family to destroy Emma's legacy and walk away unscathed would be the greater betrayal. The next morning, I called Jessica. We're moving forward, I told her all the way. The trial began on a sweltering Tuesday in August, 6 months after the fire. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters and curious onlookers, forcing me to push through a gauntlet of shouted questions and camera flashes to reach the entrance. Inside, the air conditioning was a relief, but the knot of tension in my stomach only tightened as I entered the courtroom. The space was smaller than I'd imagined, intimate, in a way that made the proceedings feel more personal, more painful. Polished wooden benches, the judge's elevated bench, the American flag hanging limply in the corner. My attorney, Jessica Harris, was already at our table arranging documents with practiced efficiency across the aisle. My father and brother sat with their defense attorney, a florid-faced man named Gregory Williams, known for his theatrical courtroom style. My father wore a conservative suit, his expression grave and dignified, the picture of a respectable businessman unjustly accused. Ethan had cleaned up as well his usual disheveled appearance, replaced by a neatly pressed shirt and tie, his hair freshly cut. They both studiously avoided looking in my direction. My mother sat directly behind them in the first row of spectators, dressed in somber navy blue, like a widow at a funeral. When our eyes briefly met, she quickly looked away, her lips pressed into a thin, disapproving line. The bailiff called the court to order, and Judge Eleanor Michaels entered, a tall, imposing woman with silver hair cut in a practical bob. After the preliminary proceedings, the trial began in earnest with opening statements. Williams went first, painting a picture of a family torn apart by greed, not mine, but my grandmother's. According to him, Emma had been manipulated in her final years by her conniving granddaughter, convinced to change her will and disinherit her own son and grandson. My father and brother, he claimed, were merely trying to reclaim what should rightfully have been shared among family. This is a case about family justice. He concluded, his voice ringing through the courtroom, about righting a wrong that should never have occurred. Yes, my clients made a terrible mistake in their pain and anger, but that mistake was born from a deeper injustice, one that Miss Carson stubbornly refuses to acknowledge. Jessica's opening was less emotional, but more factual, methodically laying out the evidence of premeditation fraud and malicious intent. She presented a timeline of harassment leading up to the arson, emphasizing that this was not a momentary lapse in judgment, but a calculated criminal act designed to defraud an insurance company and destroy my livelihood. This case is not about an inheritance dispute, she stated firmly. It is about two men who decided that if they couldn't have what they wanted, they would burn it to the ground rather than see someone else succeed. It's about arson insurance fraud and a deliberate attempt to destroy not just a building, but a young woman's future and a community institution. The trial proceeded with witness testimony. Staff members from Magnolia's described Ethan's disruptive behavior and threatening comments. The insurance agent reluctantly admitted to processing paperwork he suspected was fraudulent. As a favor to my father, the fire investigator detailed the evidence of accelerants and multiple points of origin that proved the fire was deliberately set. Most damaging was the email evidence Jessica projected onto a screen, an exchange between my father and brother dated just 2 weeks before the fire. "The insurance is in place," my father had written. "Once we collect, we'll have enough to set you up properly with more left over than that restaurant was ever worth. She'll have nothing, which is exactly what she deserves after what she's done." Ethan's reply was equally incriminating. "Can't wait." The look on her face when she sees what's left of her precious inheritance will be priceless. A murmur ran through the courtroom as these messages were displayed. I felt physically ill reading their words, seeing in black and white the deliberate cruelty, the pleasure they anticipated from my pain. When it was my turn to testify, I told my story as straightforwardly as I could. I described my relationship with Emma, the years I'd spent learning from her and helping at the restaurant. I detailed the harassment campaign after the will, reading the escalating threats, the final devastation of the fire. Throughout my testimony, I avoided looking at my family, focusing instead on Jessica's supportive nods and the judge's attentive expression. My father testified next, attempting to portray himself as a man driven to desperate measures by unfair treatment. Under Jessica's cross-examination, however, his carefully constructed facade began to crack. When pressed about the forged insurance documents, he became defensive, contradicting his earlier statements. When questioned about the emails discussing the arson plan, he claimed they were just blowing off steam, not meant to be taken literally. Ethan fared even worse on the stand. Unlike my father, he lacked the discipline to maintain his composure. Under pressure, he became argumentative, then sullen, then openly hostile. As Jessica methodically dismantled his claims of innocence, by the time he stepped down, his earlier clean-cut appearance had dissolved, his face flushed, his tie loosened, looking every bit the volatile, entitled man I knew him to be. On the trial's third day, Judge Michaels called an unexpected recess, asking both legal teams to meet in her chambers. The courtroom buzzed with speculation as we waited for their return. When they finally emerged an hour later, both attorneys looked shaken, and the judge's expression was grim. After reviewing certain documents that have come to light, Judge Michaels announced, "I believe there are additional factors relevant to this case that should be entered into evidence. The court will take a 1-hour recess, after which we will reconvene to address these new elements." Jessica wouldn't tell me what documents the judge was referring to, saying only that I should prepare myself for some surprising revelations. That hour was one of the longest of my life, spent pacing the courthouse corridors, imagining what possible new information could have caused such a reaction. When court reconvened, Judge Michaels addressed the room with measured words. "In the interest of justice, certain facts have come to my attention that bear directly on the family dynamics central to this case. While unusual, I believe these facts are material to understanding the motivations and actions of all parties involved." She nodded to the bailiff, who distributed folders to both legal teams. As Jessica opened ours, I caught a glimpse of what looked like a birth certificate and medical records. The judge continued, "It has come to the court's attention that the defendant, Ethan Carson, is not in fact the biological son of Harold and Linda Carson." A collective gasp went through the courtroom. My mind reeled, unable to process the statement. Ethan? Not my brother, not my parents' son. It made no sense. According to these records, Judge Michaels explained, Ethan is the biological son of Harold Carson's brother, James Carson, and his wife, who died in childbirth. Harold and Linda Carson adopted the infant legally, but apparently chose to raise him as their biological child, never revealing the truth of his parentage. I stared at my parents, who seemed to have aged years and moments. My father sat rigid, his face ashen. My mother had buried her face in her hands, and Ethan looked utterly lost, his mouth opening and closing wordlessly, like he was drowning. But the judge wasn't finished. Additionally, she continued, evidence has been uncovered that Harold and Linda Carson attempted to unduly influence Emma Carson to change her will. 2 years before her death, forged documents were prepared, but Mrs. Carson discovered the attempt and subsequently revised her will with additional legal protections, specific to ensure her granddaughter would inherit the restaurant without interference. She held up a folder. These documents include a letter from Emma Carson to her attorney expressing her concerns about her son and daughter-in-law's attempts to gain control of her assets, as well as her explicit wish that Magnolias pass solely to her granddaughter, whom she described as the only family member who shared her values and vision. The courtroom erupted in shocked murmurs. I sat frozen, trying to absorb these twin bombshells. My parents had tried to steal Magnolias from Emma while she was still alive, and Ethan wasn't actually my brother, but my cousin. The foundations of my family history, shaky as they already were, seemed to crumble completely beneath this new information. Judge Michaels called for order, her gavel cracking sharply. When the room quieted, she addressed my father directly. "Mr. Carson, in light of these revelations, do you wish to revise your testimony?" My father seemed to shrink in his seat. The confident businessman, replaced by a defeated old man. "No, Your Honor," he said quietly. "What you've said is true." Across the aisle, Ethan had begun to shake, his face contorted in a mix of shock and rage. "You lied to me!" he shouted suddenly, turning to my father. "My whole life is a lie." The bailiff moved quickly to restrain him as he lunged toward my father. The judge ordered Ethan removed from the courtroom until he could compose himself and called another recess to allow all parties to process the new information. In the hallway outside, Jessica explained that the documents had been discovered when the judge ordered a more thorough review of Emma's legal records, seeking context for the inheritance dispute. No one had expected to find evidence of attempted fraud dating back years, nor the truth about Ethan's parentage, which had apparently been documented in Emma's private papers with instructions to reveal it only if absolutely necessary for Amelia's protection. When the trial resumed, it proceeded quickly to its conclusion. My father and Ethan both changed their pleas to guilty on most charges, likely advised by their attorney that fighting would only result in harsher sentences. Given the new evidence, Judge Michaels delivered her ruling with clear distaste for my family's actions. Harold Carson was sentenced to 5 years in prison for arson, fraud, and conspiracy. Ethan received 3 years with mandatory counseling. Both were ordered to pay substantial restitution, and the insurance company announced they would pursue separate civil action for the attempted fraud. As the gavel fell for the final time, I felt no triumph, no vindication, only a profound sadness for the web of lies and resentment that had defined my family for longer than it ever known. The truth had indeed come to light, as Emma had predicted it would. But its revelation brought no joy, only the bitter understanding that I had never really known my family at all. 1 year after the fire, I stood on the vacant lot where Magnolias had once stood, now cleared of debris, and ready for new construction to begin. The restitution from my father and brother, combined with my own savings, and a small business loan had finally given me the means to rebuild not just the physical structure, but the dream it represented. I had decided to name the new restaurant Emma's Legacy, a tribute to the woman whose courage and foresight had made this second chance possible. The architectural plans incorporated elements of the original building, a brick facade stained glass. Accents the distinctive arched windows, but with modern updates that would make the space more efficient and inviting. The rebuilding process mirrored my own internal journey over that difficult year. At first, there had been only ruins, charred remains too painful to look at directly. The devastation had seemed complete irreparable. But gradually, piece by piece, clearing away what was destroyed made room for something new to emerge. I hadn't faced this challenge alone. David, who had been my rock during the darkest days after the fire, had become more than just a supportive friend. Our shared grief over Magnolia's loss had evolved into a partnership, both professional and personal. He had left his job at a corporate restaurant chain to join my new venture as operations manager, bringing valuable business experience to complement my culinary focus. The healing of my emotional wounds had been slower and more complicated than the physical reconstruction. In the months following the trial, I had struggled with depression, anger, and a profound sense of disconnection. Who was I? If everything I thought I knew about my family was built on lies, what did it mean that the brother I'd grown up with wasn't my brother at all, but a cousin raised under false pretenses? How could I trust my own memories when they were shadowed by such deception? Therapy became my lifeline during this period. Twice a week, I sat in Dr. Martin's calm, sunlit office, unraveling the tangled threads of my family history, examining the patterns of favoritism and manipulation that had shaped my childhood, learning to validate my own experiences. Despite my parents' attempts to rewrite reality, 6 months after the trial, I received my first letter from my mother. She was living with her sister in another state. Her marriage to my father effectively over even before his incarceration began. Her letter was a strange mix of apology and continued justification, acknowledging the pain she'd caused, while still insisting she had no choice but to support her husband and son. I wrote back not with forgiveness. I wasn't ready to offer, but with questions like, why had they lied about Ethan's parentage? Why had they resented my relationship with Emma? Why had they never been able to really see me for who I was? Her responses over subsequent months revealed a woman ID never truly known, one whose own insecurities and disappointments had colored every aspect of our family dynamic. She admitted to feeling threatened by the bond between Emma and me, jealous of the ease between us that she had never managed to establish with either of her children. She confessed that taking in Ethan had been her husband's decision, one she had resented even while presenting a united front to the world. These revelations didn't excuse what she'd done, but they helped me understand the broken people my parents were, how their own unhealed wounds had created the toxic environment I'd grown up in. This understanding didn't bring reconciliation. Our relationship remained tentative and distant, but it allowed me to release some of the anger that had been poisoning my own healing. Ethan, surprisingly, was the first to offer a genuine apology. 8 months into his sentence, he sent a letter that showed more self-awareness than it ever witnessed from him. I always knew I was different, he wrote. I felt it even though no one said it. Maybe that's why I was so angry all the time, why I could never feel satisfied with anything. Finding out the truth was like having the ground disappear beneath my feet. But now that I'm in therapy, I'm starting to see how much of my life was spent trying to prove I belonged, that I deserved what you had. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I'm trying to understand why I became the person who could do such a terrible thing to you. I didn't respond immediately, needing time to process his words. Eventually, I sent a brief note acknowledging his apology and wishing him well in his continued therapy. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet, but it was an opening a crack in the wall it built between myself and my family. As the months passed, I found myself able to think about Emma without the sharp pain of loss overwhelming me. I could remember her laugh, her wise advice, her steadfast belief in me, and feel gratitude rather than grief. I began collecting stories from longtime Magnolia's customers, recording their memories of special celebrations, regular Sunday dinners, first dates, and milestone anniversaries spent at the restaurant. These stories would become part of the new restaurant's decor, printed alongside photographs salvaged from community members' personal collections, creating a mosaic of memories that honored the original Magnolias while embracing its evolution into something new. It was Emma who had taught me that traditions matter most when they adapt and grow, remaining rooted in their essence while responding to changing times. The grand opening of Emma's legacy was scheduled for what would have been her 95th birthday. As the date approached, my anxiety mingled with excitement. Would the new restaurant capture the spirit of the original? Would our customers return? Had I honored Emma's vision while making the business my own? 2 weeks before opening, I received another unexpected letter. This one from my father. His handwriting, once bold and confident, appeared shaky on the prison stationery. I have no right to ask anything of you, he wrote, but I want you to know that losing everything, my freedom, my marriage, my reputation, has forced me to face the truth of who I am and what I've done. Not just to you, but to Ethan, to your mother, to Emma. I've lived my entire life trying to control others, to bend them to my will, to punish them when they resisted. I can't undo any of it. All I can say is that I'm sorry. Truly sorry for the pain I've caused you. You deserved better from your father. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the box where I kept Emma's recipes and letters, not yet ready to respond, but acknowledging that his words had touched something in me. Perhaps someday there might be room for a different kind of relationship. Not the one I had longed for as a child, but something new built on honesty rather than manipulation and control. The day Emma's legacy opened its doors, the line of customers stretched around the block. Many were familiar faces, Magnolia's regulars eager to support this new chapter. Others were drawn by the media coverage of our story, curious to see how triumph had emerged from tragedy. David stood beside me as we cut the ribbon, his hand steady on my back, his smile reflecting my own mix of joy and nervous anticipation. The staff, a blend of former Magnolia's employees and new team members, watched expectantly, ready to welcome our first guests as people filled the dining room, exclaiming over the decor that honored the past while embracing the present. Sampling updated versions of Emma's classic dishes alongside my own creations, I felt a sense of completion of having come full circle. The journey had been painful beyond imagining, but it had led me here to a place of strength and clarity I might never have found otherwise. In the quiet moment before dinner service began, I slipped away to the small office off the kitchen, where ID placed a photograph of Emma on the wall. Looking at her smiling face, I whispered to thank you, not just for the inheritance that had started this journey, but for the more valuable legacy. She had left me the courage to stand firm in my convictions, the resilience to rebuild from ashes, and the wisdom to know that sometimes losing what you thought you needed can lead you to discover what you truly deserve. The truth does have a way of revealing itself, just as Emma had always said. And in that truth, painful as it was, I had found my way forward, not defined by my family's betrayal, but by my own capacity to create something beautiful from destruction, to transform loss into legacy. What has been your most challenging family situation? And how did you find the strength to handle it? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Remember to like this video if it resonated with you. Subscribe to hear more real-life experiences, and share with someone who might need to know they're not alone in family struggles. Thank you for being here today, and remember that sometimes our greatest growth comes from our deepest wounds.